Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respect to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. Welcome to newcomers listening to the podcast. We love hearing the diverse reasons why teachers are joining. So much deep and creative literacy work going on in schools. Some of the recent comments that we've got from people joining our Teachers Toolkit for Literacy Facebook group. Just a few comments to share. Someone said, I'm passionate about nurturing my students to develop a love of reading. I'm a literacy leader at my school and I'm looking to learn and make connections with others in the field. Another one, I'm a school services officer and have felt renewed in my knowledge through listening to the podcasts. And lastly, someone wrote in, I'm delighted to know there's help in the form of Teachific resources. So if you're not a member of the Teachers Toolkit Facebook group, we'd love you to join if you feel that that's something that would support you in your learning, and introduce yourself to the group. And welcome to this podcast called How Do We Teach Comprehension? And we bring this one to you with the wonderful help of Diane Snowball. So welcome to the podcast, Di.
Thank you, Sharon.
And Di, expert educator, regular guest on the podcast, and someone who you've spent a lot of time in the space of comprehension. So we're really excited to be drawing on your insights and knowledge that we can think and talk about today as we think about teaching comprehension. So first up, before we begin comprehension chat, what have you been up to lately, Di?
Rereading everything that I've written and read before about teaching comprehension. I sort of wonder at my age, will I start to forget things? So, a lot of that. I've been working in a school with a graduate teacher, and that's always a really good thing to do because it brings us back to realising how much there is to learn, and we can't make it overwhelming for graduate teachers, but at the same time there's so much for them to need to know in the teaching of reading, and you feel like you wish you could just do it all so quickly because every day that goes by there are children waiting to learn to read. What we do as teachers makes a big difference. But, she works really hard and is very keen to learn. And it's just wonderful to work with teachers like that.
Yes. And I must add that in this last week I had the absolute privilege and pleasure of working with 14 early career teachers in part of the project schools that we're working in. So that was tremendous I get to spend 2 days with them. So we had 1 day last week and we made comprehension one of those areas of focus. So,
that's great.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I suppose sort of in leading into today, why we're bringing this topic of teaching comprehension, you've already drawn on one of those factors is there's always still things to be learning about it, that it's not, we don't just, okay, we've got this, we keep thinking and learning and building our repertoire of knowledge around the teaching of comprehension so that we can really support and deepen our students' understanding more as we go along. And in fact, maybe I'm surprised or maybe I'm not, maybe because we keep thinking about it too, but it's a question I still get asked so frequently, even from more experienced teachers, that this idea of, how can I really deepen comprehension? How can I, they do a lot of work and a lot of teaching around it. And I suppose we're always still seeking better ways, better insights into that. And so teachers are often saying, look, I'm still wondering, are students really getting deeper at their understanding, or am I doing a lot of teaching and it's not being transferred? So that's something we will explore today. And as teachers, we need to know some of those steps to get started and really work towards that transfer that we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's interesting that when I first started to write about the teaching of comprehension was because when I was working in New York and other parts of the United States, that many teachers were asking those questions. And I thought everybody wants to know about how to do it. So we should just provide some sort of professional resource, because they can't all go to professional courses out of school or during vacations or whatever, and they don't necessarily know where to go to read about something like this.
Yep.
And so I actually decided, as you may remember, to produce a CD-ROM so that we could put onto it not just articles and things to do, but also add film clips and photographs and lots of examples. And so I think if it had been printed out, it would have been about, I don't know how many thousand pages or something. But by being able to go to whichever part you wanted on a CD-ROM, it was more manageable. But, the tragedy of that is you can't look at a CD-ROM anymore because computers don't have the drive for it.
That's right.
And although I had lots of them left, in the end I had nothing to do with them but take them to the tip. Oh, isn't that shocking?
Yes, I know, that collective knowledge that was in there, both the overview of all of those, particularly all of those comprehension strategies.
Yep.
And then, as you say, the visuals, because we all love to be able to see what does that look like.
What does it look like? Exactly.
Yes.
And, the interesting thing is that in many ways what's done in that sort of way rather than a printed book, it also becomes easier to change, because what I find interesting is I had used a major resource from the International Reading Association, as it was then. It's now the International Literacy Association. And it was a book that they produce every few years, and I think they're still doing it, called What Does Research or something like What Does Research Tell Us About How to Teach Reading?
Yes.
And it covers everything from comprehension, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, a whole range of things, assessment, you name it, that's what they will cover, and they'll review it and write about those same areas every few years. And so the people who were responsible for the major chapter on comprehension strategies in that book, Nell Duke and David Pearson, David Pearson has always written a lot and kept himself thinking about and researching comprehension. So I kept following that, and it was interesting to see how they decided that the major comprehension strategies by their, I think it was their third edition, had changed quite a lot. Well, no, not a lot, but had changed a little from what they had said when I first embarked on developing those CD-ROMs. And so it's worthwhile thinking about what those strategies are and why they might have changed. And, from that, they also talk about in the book the best ways of going about teaching it. So It was a really good research book for me to start from. And that's where I think we always need to go back to what does the valid, and I mean valid and reliable research say about this from the real scholars in this field? And how do we make use of that knowledge then as a teacher to put it into practice in our classrooms? So that's what I'm going to be, using as the foundation for what we talk about today.
Yes. I think the book is called Best
No.
Practice. No, not Best
No, it's
Practices
not.
in Literacy Instruction.
No. That's a really good book too. But it's just simply, what does research tell us about reading instruction? It's a very, very simple title like that. In fact, I was just about to look it up before we started speaking, but we can put that in the notes that go with this anyway, because it's really worth following up. So...
Yes, and it's good for us to have to know where the good places are to go looking for information.
Definitely.
And we can be absolutely sure about the work. Oh, what research? Here it is. What research tells us about reading instruction?
Yep, that's it. Yep.
There we go.
And, chapters by David Pearson, for example, if you look up his name in your search program, whatever you're using, you'll find that the article is even available free online, talking about teaching comprehension. So it's terrific the way these things are easily accessible to us, but we need to know they exist in order to even find them.
Yes,
but it's a fabulous chapter in the book that I would recommend every teacher reads, regardless of what year level and even what subject, because it's got so much information in it. It's fabulous.
I can hear right now people downloading that, and and these are the kinds of things we want to bring to our our learning communities, to our staff meetings, to our as well as our own professional reading. But when we're in schools, to be able to share those kinds of documents between us and have some common understandings about things, as well as exploring things that exist and don't exist within our teaching, then they're exactly the kinds of things we want to be pointed in the direction of. So thank you,
definitely. Di. Okay.
Actually, whilst you're there talking about particularly David Pearson's work around comprehension, you said that there has been a little bit of some additions actually to what are considered to be the main comprehension strategies. So maybe I think that's something. I mean, people are always asking me that one. What are
they?
Yes,
and I think it is really important to know, because it's very strange that the way of assessing comprehension across this Australia at the moment is the NAPLAN test, and yet it really just asks questions for the children to answer. And yet if I really want to find out about a student's comprehension, I need to listen to them read, and then I need to find out if they're actually using these specific strategies, because if they're not, that's what I need to know. If that's what's getting in the way of their comprehension, I've got to specifically know what it is that they don't know about, so that I can help them improve. And look, I want to use just one quick example to show you what I mean. And this was a friend's daughter when she was in secondary school. When they went to parent-teacher interviews, they were told by every subject teacher that their daughter did not comprehend easily. She was having difficulty with that in every subject area. Yep. So I listened to her read and spoke to her about what she was reading to find out what was going on. So I was actually interested in asking things like, did she predict what was going to be in the text, both before she read it and while she was reading it? What sort of inferences was she making? I was watching out for where she would need to make an inference in order to understand, and I would ask her about that. I was saying to her, do you have any questions in your head while you're reading this? And if so, what are they? Are you visualising what you're reading? Can you summarise and retell? They're two different things about what you've been reading, and so on. So I actually am digging in to find out about which comprehension strategy she's using, not just can she answer a question on a test. And then I would know where to help her. But I want to add to the picture, because there are other things that influence what you understand and how much you understand what you read. And in this particular case, the girl was reading a novel about Vikings, and it was the class novel, which often would happen in a secondary school English class. There would be the class novel. Now, when I asked this girl what was she picturing while she was reading it, she really was very doubtful about what she was able to picture at all. And we discovered that she absolutely knew nothing about Vikings. She did not know when the Vikings were around, what they did, what their normal lives were, where were they, what did they dress like, what were they, they were famous for, bit of rape and pillage perhaps, but so none of that background knowledge was there. So it was extraordinarily difficult for this girl to understand this novel. And it really brings up that it may well be that she is actually able to use those strategies, but for this particular book she can't because she doesn't have enough background knowledge about the topic. And the other thing, I would ask her the meaning of particular words in the book. Anything that was to do with Vikings, she had no idea what the meaning of the word was. But I also discovered there were some very simple words like mound, as in, a mound on the ground, that she didn't know what mound meant. So by going deeper with that, I found out that her vocabulary knowledge was really quite minimal. And I wondered about it because she's a bright girl, supposedly was reading a lot, but I think that might have been a lot of pretend reading. And there was a lot of other things that were causing that to happen. Third child in a family, some things, etc. But so it wasn't until we found that out that I could actually talk with her parents about what we could do to build the girl's world knowledge, what we could do to, in the same way, build her vocabulary, because they go together. And then we could start to look at, was she able to use particular comprehension strategies? But I would find that out more by her reading something she actually knows about. And so that led to us knowing what to do, and a lot more about even how to assess her comprehension. And then we knew what teaching to do. So it's, these things are multiple, aren't they? It's not just one thing, and you can't find it out just by asking some questions.
No, in fact, I really like the shift there from, because in finding out what students are understanding, we often, or sometimes, like in that plan, we ask questions to find out what really information they have retained or, can reference back to. But this is a different set of questions that you're asking. This is about use of strategies, not about recall, not about going back and finding information. This is about how they have already used strategies as they were reading to make sense.
Exactly. And if we don't know what those strategies are as teachers, we don't know what to be finding out about, and we don't know what to teach.
Exactly.
So it's a really important basic information. And I mean, I can tell you now just a quick list of what they are, because people could go back and listen again and write them down.
Yes.
And I think I should do that so we know what we're talking about. Yes,
I agree.
Okay, so this was what Pearson and other researchers identified as the main ones that we mostly use. Setting a purpose for reading, predicting using prior knowledge, thinking aloud, and this is interesting, to actually be thinking aloud about what you're doing as a reader is actually a strategy to use to help your understanding. Inferring. Now, that comes up all the time, that teachers say their kids don't know how to do that, and I'm going to talk more about that today. Using text structure and features. Questioning. So this is the reader asking questions of themselves or of the text while they're reading. It's not someone asking questions before or after the reader. It's reading. It's what the reader does. Monitoring your own understanding. clarifying where you think you're losing meaning, and fixing up, using some sort of strategy to fix up your misunderstandings, or, realizing that you need to do something else than what you're doing because what you're doing is not working. Visualizing and forming visual representations. So what I mean by visual representation, I could describe for you how a chicken lays an egg, right? But I could also, or how a butterfly comes out of, a butterfly, of course, comes out of a pupa, doesn't it?
Yes.
I could describe that in words, or I could draw a diagram. So that would be a visual representation of that text, and it would show my understanding of that because I can do a diagram of it. And also summarising and retelling, and they are slightly different things. So they're the main ones. It's no particular order. It's not hierarchical. We don't necessarily use all of them with everything we read, but we do different things, I've discovered, even at different parts of a text. And as soon as you start that metacognition, that thinking about what you're doing while you're doing it and how you're doing it, you start to notice what you are doing as a reader, and it can help you to understand what the kids need to know about.
Yes.
So, for example, I've been noticing as a reader that when I start to read something, I do a lot more questioning, because if it's a story, I'm trying to find out who's in it, what's happening, where's it taking place, who is this person that's mentioned, So I have a lot of questions as I try to figure out what's this going to be about. And I'll start to make predictions as I go further into the text and I get a bit more knowledge to make those predictions. Or I might even go back and reread the cover blurb if there is one, and then start to make some predictions. But I don't necessarily do that before I even start to read any of the text. So you can, but as you know more, you will make more informed predictions. So I'm noticing all the time now as a reader, if I can't get pictures in my head of what I'm reading, why not?
Yeah.
Is it because I don't know enough about this, and therefore I'm going to have trouble understanding it? And therefore and if I'm thinking of younger students learning to read, perhaps this isn't a good book for me to be reading because I don't really know anything about the content, so I'm not going to be able to use very many good comprehension strategies, and I won't be able to work out the words very easily either. So content knowledge is important, and I'm aware that if this is something really new to me, that there are perhaps things I need to do before I go on with my reading. So that awareness then, and I think that the type of questioning we do in a conference with a student is to try to find out what are they doing as a reader. Can they articulate that? Or is it just that they're not even aware that these things are going on in their head?
That's such a big distinction right there, isn't it, Di, around when we have children engaging with text, and, they'll often be thinking about, can they, they might choose a text by, okay, how many words have I come across that I don't, that I can't read, or, that I don't understand.
Yes.
But in fact, it's actually teaching them to be far more aware of the comprehension. Like, what are they doing? What's the thinking they're doing to get meaning from this text that is going to make a book more, whether this is right for me at the moment or not. And so I think that's a layer of questions that we haven't necessarily overlaid yet onto children, thinking about, how they are managing as a reader, what they're actually doing as a reader. Have we narrowed it a bit too much about, well, you're successful as a reader if you're decoding all the words and you're reading at this rate, but what is the thinking that you are doing? Because that's what reading is, isn't it?
It is definitely.
Thinking that you are doing to understand what this text is, what this text is about.
Exactly. Now, if you go back to think about what you spoke about a couple of sessions ago about thinking about reading, and
Yes.
you talked about the work of Aidan Chambers, for example, and I too was very influenced by his books, Book Talk and Tell Me, and he was really on the ball there when he was talking about tell me what you're thinking.
Mm.
All right. Now, the interesting thing is that can have many sides to it. And it could be thinking about the content, thinking about perhaps something it reminded you of, or, there's a million possibilities when you just have such an open-ended question.
Yeah.
But some of the thinking can be that metacognition about what I was doing as a reader.
Yes.
And so we need to open that door as well.
Mm.
But, they won't know that that's what readers do unless we actually demonstrate it. And this gets down to how do you actually teach these strategies? Yet again, those conditions for learning that Brian Camborne talked about, or Duke and Pearson referred to it as the gradual release of responsibility.
Yes.
We need to demonstrate, because it's what's going on in our heads when we read that we can't show by, we have to just let them know what's going on in my mind. I have to share that with them and let them know this is what I'm doing when I read this text. And you could also be doing those sorts of things when you are reading. And so I've done loads of those demonstrations with kids, and I don't even do any preparation for it purposely, because I just want to pick up the book or whatever text it is, start reading to the kids, and whatever is coming into my mind that I'm aware of doing, I tell them, this is what this text made me think about as a reader. So on the one hand, I'm thinking, if it's a story, I'm thinking about the story and the characters and the plot, where it's taking place, etc. But isn't that interesting? That's actually part of visualising. Who's in it? What do they look like? Where are they? When?
Yes.
And what's happening? It's the film of, in this case, a story. And it happens by you visualising this movie as you're reading the words. Now, if I don't let them know this is what this text is doing to me, making me visualise, and I'm thinking blah, 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 because the author said blah, blah, then they won't know that that's one of the types of thinking they could be doing. So I need to be demonstrating that with each of the major strategies. There are other things, of course, I demonstrate about reading, how I work out words and what do I do when I come to unknown words and all sorts of things. But these strategies are something that I need to demonstrate right from the time kids start to learn to read. And it's very interesting to me how much inferring very beginning readers need to do when they're reading very simple texts, because there's not very much written. They have to infer a lot. And, some people are really saying, kids shouldn't be looking at the pictures. But, in a lot of those books for beginning readers, no matter what kind they are, if you don't also look at the pictures, and I mean also, you don't actually know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And because there isn't enough text, even who's speaking. For example, I think off the top of my head, I can think something like, "Are you my mother?" Very, very simple book. But who's asking that question through the book? Because if you don't, and it doesn't say, said the such and such, but you have to figure it out from the pictures who's actually saying what in order for you to understand. And it's just amazing to me that someone would say, you shouldn't be letting them look at the pictures. That makes them guess. There's no such thing as guessing in reading.
No.
You can use evidence to infer or to predict, but nothing about it should be a guess. There has to be evidence for all of the things that you're thinking, whether it's how to pronounce that word, or whether it's this is what's happening, or this is the message the author really has. Even something like, I've got a book in front of me, Tarantulas Are Spiders. So each page it tells us something about tarantulas. And on the last page, there's a picture of a spider on a plate with a knife and fork beside it. So we can see it's actually the size of a dinner plate, right? Mm. And the text says tarantulas are the biggest spiders in the world. How big? As big as a dinner plate.
Yeah.
And how do we know that? Because we are inferring from the picture that this spider is as big as a dinner plate. So even though that text is not specifically there, we are able to use the picture as evidence to be able to infer that's how big a tarantula can be. Now, that's a book that very young children are reading. So I need to demonstrate all the time with fiction and non-fiction what I'm thinking in my head that's helping me to understand what's going on in that text.
And just coming back to that idea of, that we do need to be reading, we're getting information from the text, but we're getting information from everything that's on the page. Yep. And Nikki Clausen-Grace and Michelle Kelly, who've written, they've written 2 books that, one, Comprehension Shouldn't Be Silent.
Right, sounds good.
Which is, there's, that underutilised strategy of, talk and discussion in developing comprehension.
Right. Yes.
But they've also written a book called Reading the Whole Page.
Right.
And whilst it looks a lot at informational text, it's bringing this same thing to bear, that we aren't just reading the words on a page, we're reading the whole page.
Exactly.
And so that idea of, if we're reading, a fiction text and we say we want students to concentrate on the text that's on the page, yes, we do, but for that text is also there embedded within illustration and with other things, with titles, with headings, with all of these things. We need to be reading all of that. So we can't just focus on one thing and leave all the other bits out. Otherwise, we can't get to the inferring. We can't get to the predicting or connecting, or there's a whole lot of things we can't do.
Definitely.
So I like that you made that point. So, Di, I am going to bring you just back to, you've got a little sort of bit of a brief description of teaching comprehension.
Yeah.
That maybe if we could go through sort of those steps. You've already really talked wonderfully about, and I think this is a big connection for people to make, is that when we are teaching comprehension strategies and when we are letting readers into what a good reader is doing, the thinking that they are doing as they are reading, which is what you do when you're modelling, but you're doing that with text. You're not doing it with a worksheet. You're not doing with a something pulled out of nowhere. You are intentional about using text that you are able to demonstrate to the reader what you are doing as you are thinking, and the thinking you're doing as you were reading, so that they can already be starting to to understand, oh, this is what I do as I'm reading. So when it's
Exactly.
separated out, when it's separated out into us, lots of teachers say, I found a piece of text and we worked with it and we practiced with that, but they're not applying it to their own reading.
Yeah.
So can you just take us through, like the steps that you've outlined here that I think are really important to talk to, so that we can really know what the effective teaching of comprehension can look like?
Yep, for sure.
Great.
Now, I want to start by saying that there's a lot of discussion about whether you should teach one of those strategies at a time or whether you should teach them all together.
Oh.
And, so what I find is that it isn't one or the other. But I know that from all of my years of teaching that if I want to introduce something to kids and do it thoroughly, that we might focus on that for a short time, but as quickly as possible, integrate it with whatever else is going on at the same time. So that I might decide that I want to really focus for a little bit on visualising. Because, I do ask some kids the question, what were you visualising? What were you picturing when you were reading that?
Yes.
Huh? You mean I'm supposed to be picturing something? And I'm serious. So, no wonder the poor things are not understanding what they're reading. But I will focus a little bit on that strategy to teach. But I don't ignore what else might be happening at the same time. And so, for example, if I want to teach the kids something about, let's say, well, I'll stick with visualising.
Yeah.
When I'm visualising something, then it's more than just what's on the page that's helping me to visualise, but it's also my own knowledge. So making use of my world knowledge as well as what the author is saying enables me to have some sort of picture in my head of what's going on or what people look like. But I will also need to infer some things that the author is saying in order for me to get that picture. Yeah. So I might need to talk about all of those things together, but we are specifically working on improving our visualising. So
Right.
I'll come back now to the whole process, but I just want to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
all right?
That's a good point, because it's allowing us to be intentional about going deeper with some of with specific strategies that we found our students aren't bringing to their own reading. So So through our knowledge of what our students are doing and aren't doing, that would be how we decide, I'm going to do some specific work on that, but not to the exclusion of other things. But we can go deeper with one whilst showing how we integrate it with others.
Definitely.
Yeah, lovely.
And that's all going to be because I'm going to be always very explicit in my description of the strategy and when and how it should be used and what's going on in my head and what's causing me to actually be doing that, so enough information for them to realise what I'm actually doing. Yeah. But I will start by saying, and this is the link with their own reading, I've noticed when I've been conferring with some of you during independent reading time, and of course you've got to have large slabs of that time, otherwise you won't find out anything about your students, let alone giving them time to practice. So I've noticed when I've been conferring with some of you that you are not sure about whether you should be getting pictures in your head while you're reading, or if so, how do you do that? Why do you do that? And so I want us to focus on that for a little while until you feel really comfortable with that in your own reading. So you see, I'm not just, woke up today and decided I'm going to teach you visualising, but I can see this is something you need to do more of. I might even say, I've noticed that Sharon does this really well, and I'd like her at the end of our independent reading time today for her to share how she's been visualising. So it doesn't just have to be me. So then I will actually, and I don't need any program. And I just need the books in my classroom that the students are reading.
Yes.
And I will purposely make sure, of course, that I've got a very rich classroom library, because I want to demonstrate this strategy using different kinds of non-fiction and fiction text. So, and I also know, by the way, that if I want to demonstrate visualising, that some authors are really good at helping us visualise. They're very descriptive. I'll also find some poetry is very descriptive. So because I'm focusing on this strategy, I try to specifically find texts that will enable them to have a go at that without it being a struggle. So I might even have a box of books or other texts. It might be articles from a newspaper. It might be something that we might listen to, a podcast or something, and we will use whatever we've got to apply the demonstration of this strategy.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm also thinking, if I want them to visualise, there is no point in me reading something to them or them reading something that they know nothing about, e.g. The Girl with the Vikings.
Yes.
So I'm looking for material that's within their experiences. Sometimes that might mean, by the way, that I will do this in a small group session to make sure that this group of kids really, it's something they know a lot about. So I'm going to model it, and I'm also going to get them to start doing some with me, so that if I read the next bit, I want you to also be thinking about what are you visualising during this time. I may even get them to do a sketch of it. And in fact, I think it was Jerry Haast who came up with this little activity, sketch to stretch.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So you each sketch what you were picturing, and then you can talk in pairs or small groups, because we may all be getting a slightly different picture influenced by our knowledge of what's in the text.
Yeah.
But if it's completely out of kilter with what the meaning of the text is, then we know something's not working right there.
Yes.
But I will also make sure that I will, and I'll either make a copy from my electric whiteboard of this text, so I can actually point at the parts of the text where the author is giving me the clues about what the visualising is going to be. Or where I might even need to infer the author's not actually saying this man is old, but because of the description of how he walks and talks, then I infer this man is old. So I'm going to get a different picture in my head than if I thought he was young.
Yes.
So I need to show the evidence in the text that's influencing my thinking. And then as we work on these things together, I'm saying to the kids, and in your reading today, I want you to be thinking about what you're visualising and to notice which part of the text is helping you to do that. At the end of our session, some of you can share what you have done. Now, I can't I just want to finish what I'm thinking, Sharon.
Sorry.
I can't just do this with one text either, because in their own independent reading, they might all be reading different kinds of things. So I need to continue to do this with different texts over a few days, and fiction and non-fiction, so we can sort of get an idea of how even the text structure and type might be influencing what I'm thinking, and the purpose for reading the text, of course. Then I want them to be using it by themselves, and during that conferring time again, if I find some students are not very good at using that strategy yet, then I will form a small group and we will work on that more. And really, it's interesting, if I was a primary school teacher, I've got those kids every day. I'm not going to have a different group tomorrow and then a different group on the third day and then a different group on the fourth day. To me, it makes more sense to say, I'm working with this group today on helping them visualise. So tomorrow I'm going to work with them again and see how they're going. do a bit more teaching, see what they're doing in their own independent reading, and if necessary, a third day and perhaps a fourth day until I feel like they really have got it. Now, I'm not saying that's going to go on forever. If it did, I don't think I'd be doing a very good job. But why do I need to move on to somebody else if we haven't really thoroughly worked with this group yet? In the long run, they're all going to get the same amount of time and attention, but it seems more sensible to me to really get something thoroughly done rather than, then they have to wait 4 days for me to see them again. That might throw some people's thinking, really out of whack. But we have to stand back and think about what makes sense.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that group does not exist anymore, right? Because we've worked on what they needed. Now off you go. And this is now part of your independent practice. So why are you still in my group?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's we connect that back to when you talked about that as you're using the strategy, as you're doing the think aloud, that you're actually giving all the students at that point the opportunity to practice it with you.
Yep.
And that practicing with you actually kind of lets us, if they're doing that practice, then that's what we're checking in on, how they're going with that. And it's just going to be those few who might not be there, but the rest we can go, they've already had a practice with us, and we don't have to do that in a one-on-one conference or a small group time with them again. If they've got that and they're ready to go practice it, they're ready to go practice it.
Exactly.
Let's give them the time to use it now rather than pulling them back, at different times saying, okay, well, it's your turn today. Let's go through this to only find that, okay, we're all good with that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think time and the timing of these things are where the headset needs to shift sometimes.
Definitely.
That time, that modelling time and that time to practice with the teacher is just a small amount of time compared to how much time they've got to use that.
Exactly.
To use
and that's why
themselves.
I'd rather, do a small amount. Now let's get on with you having a go at it. But I'm going to deal with it again tomorrow and the day after and the day after.
Yes.
So because sometimes I'll notice that for an entire shared reading session, the children have not ever read the book, or for an entire time when the teacher's trying to teach the kids something that the kids then never actually get a chance to practice it. So we've got to just think very sensibly about this.
Yes.
But can I just give you one example of what I might do with the kids to let them know what's going on in my head? This book's called The Land of Never Endings, and it's by Kate Saunders, who is a fabulous, reasonably new writer. Mm-hmm. I give her books to all of my kids who are about 10 years old onwards. So the first chapter is called The Book of Bluey. The Book of Bluey. I'm wondering already, my question is, I wonder who Bluey is and what's the book? So it starts, when Holly died. Well, who's Holly? Goodness, this is sad. This is what's going on in my head at the moment. I'm asking a question. I'm trying to think about who Holly might be. And obviously, if she died, this is a very sad occasion. Where is it? When Holly died, Bluey suddenly fell silent and all the lights went out in Smockaroon. My question's already in just the first sentence. Who's Holly? Who's Bluey? What or where is Smockaroon? And what does it mean that Bluey fell silent and all the lights went out? I have nothing but questions at this stage. And it's because the author has thrown me right into the story and I'm trying to figure out Who's going to be in it? Where's it taking place? When did it take place? What's going on? Next sentence. Holly's bedroom was an empty cave that Emily was scared to walk past at night. Who's Emily?
Emily? Yes.
What's the relationship with Emily and Holly? So they must have lived in the same house. There's a clue from the author. Holly's bedroom was an empty cave that Emily was scared to walk past at night. So I can infer that they lived in the same house before Holly died. But I'm wondering why she was scared to walk past it at night. Men came to rip out the special lift for her chair. I'm inferring that her is Molly. We make inferences in lots of ways when we read. Her chair, whose chair? If I read back, it's Holly's. So men came to rip out the special lift for her chair, the huge hoist over the bath, and all the other things Holly didn't need anymore. I'm starting to infer that Holly was disabled in some way because the author is telling me she needed a special lift for her chair and a huge hoist over the bath and many other things. But now that she's no longer alive, she doesn't need them anymore. Emily had grown up saying, my sister is disabled. My prediction, my inference is the evidence there that confirms what I was thinking. My sister is disabled, and now she had got used to saying, my sister is dead. So now I know about the relationship between Emily and Holly because she calls Holly her sister. So I'm gathering information as I'm reading. I'm starting to get some pictures in my mind about who these two girls might be. I yet don't even know how old they are. A lot of things I'm still trying to get some information to have a picture, but at least I've got this blur of two girls, one of them being disabled. All right, so that might be where I finish today. And I might point out that when I'm reading, I ask myself a lot of questions. And I would have said that at the beginning too, that we're learning more about questioning. So listen for the questions, the types of questions I'm asking when I read this to you and I share with you about what's going on in my head. Why do I ask these sorts of questions when I'm reading fiction? See, there are many kids who really don't know the main elements of fiction. So they don't know what they're watching out for, that it's characters, plot, setting, right?
Yes.
And so they're the questions I need to ask when I'm starting to read fiction because they're the basic elements of a story that will help me understand what it's about. So you see how much information I'm sharing that they could apply to any fiction piece that they are reading. I would do exactly the same thing if it was a picture book or an 8-page book that a very beginning reader is using. And because all of those strategies, they all need to use, no matter what the age and no matter what the complexity of the text is. So it's my demonstration being very explicit about what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, how the author is helping me, what I know about texts and how they work, etc.
Yeah. And leading straight into, as we said then, that opportunity to apply and to use and to reflect on how they've used it.
Exactly. So now we're into independent reading time.
Yes.
And I'm going to continue to teach that strategy through a lot of demonstration. Knowing what kids are like, they will want me to go on reading that book.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And
that's a good question, actually. People will often say, we've used that for the demonstration, but when do we do more reading with that?
Yes. Well,
And
I don't need to go to another book, do I?
no,
I certainly need to be doing it with other kinds of texts. And
yes,
guess what? In our science work this
yeah,
afternoon, I might do the same sort of thing with
yes,
a non-fiction book that we're using to help us with some investigation we're doing.
yeah,
So it's all during the day. I'm aware and they're aware that we're learning a lot more about how to ask questions when we read,
yeah,
how the text might influence the type of questions we ask,
yes,
what we do with that, etc.
yes. Now, so would we say all comprehension strategies, we can definitely say all comprehension strategies can be brought to children of any age.
Not only can they must
They
be.
must be.
Yes.
And then do we say that we would use all comprehension strategies across all types of texts?
Absolutely. Otherwise, how will we expect them to apply it to all kinds of texts?
Yeah.
And, we know that we want their independent reading to be from a variety of texts.
Yes.
And if it's not, we guide it to be that way, don't we? We know that it has to happen with our read aloud and our shared reading and our independent reading. Otherwise, by the way, they won't know how to write.
Yes,
All
well,
kinds of texts.
that's exactly right. So the whole time I'm sitting here thinking this is reading like a writer.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because we're also thinking about how did the author do this to make me think this way?
Yes.
So when I'm writing, do I always have to just describe someone, or are there other ways I can give the same clues to the reader in a more interesting way?
Yes.
And we can highlight that and go back to it in our writing, can't we?
Yes.
So
yes. And so we can make those connections, without them being, I think that's the big connection for the comprehension piece is what did the writer do here to help us understand this or get us into the information or put us right in the middle of the action or make us wonder so much or...
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're very parallel processes going on, the thinking about what we're reading as well as thinking about how that was achieved by the writer.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that, just keep reinforcing how could you use this strategy in your own reading? How could this help you with anything you are reading?
Yes.
Don't forget to think about the pictures, visualising when you're reading. I can keep referring to what they're doing as a reader so they understand this is something for them, not just for me.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's right, because we want them to be active. We want them to be active in this process, not just seeing it modelled, but that question that you ask is my favourite of all times, is how can I use this with anything that I read?
Exactly.
That's the gold, standard question there.
It is definitely.
Yes, yeah, because that absolutely gets us into knowing that that's what we're thinking about all the time. Anytime I'm reading, what have I been working on? What have we been trying, thinking about that I can bring to this, and that this is that piece that I've got so much to bring. I think really being explicit about the comprehension strategies just opens up a whole lot of new doors for readers, because it's all of the thinking doors.
It is, definitely.
Yes, yeah.
And I want to make a specific point about inferring, because so many teachers ask me about it. And I find that if I don't let them know what's going on in my head and demonstrate how I inferred and what information was in the text and what information did I bring to it and how I brought them together, then they will never know how to infer.
Yes.
And there are so many opportunities for that. Even when I was reading that, just inferring who is saying something, or, inferring where this might be taking place. There were so many things I was trying to work out by making inferences in just that very short piece of text. But I discovered that there was nothing very much written about all kinds of inferring. Even the inferring, if the text says she, who is she? I have to look back and work out, was that going to be Holly or Emily?
Yeah.
And how do I do that? And this is so important for children whose first language is not English, because their own first language might have a different structure where that's not necessary to go back and find out, because it's the what's the words I'm looking for? Sort of like the suffixes in the words that will help you to know whether it was a male or a female or who it was or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So, but I must demonstrate even the inferences like that. So I actually made a list of the type of inferences we make when we read fiction and when we read non-fiction, so that, again, it helps us to know as a teacher what are the kinds of inferences that I need to teach my kids about. I can't just say I want to teach them to infer. There's lots of kinds of inferring, and it varies from fiction to non-fiction texts. Some of them are the same, but not all. So if I don't have that list, I probably won't know to do it. I'll just be thinking, oh, they can't infer. Why? Right?
Oh, right.
I've got to be very explicit in all of the kinds of inferring and what's helping me do it.
Right, Di, everyone's going, where's the list? Where's the list?
Well, we'll include it in the notes.
Yes,
right.
because
I've got such a list.
Yeah, these are, the thinking that you have, the thinking and the synthesizing that you've been doing around comprehension for us really brings it to us as accessible, some accessible tools actually, for us to learn some quite specific things to be more explicit about the teaching of comprehension. So
definitely.
Yeah. So that, I know there'll be plenty of people absolutely going, oh, because that, the inferring, we often hear ourselves saying, well, what do we do to infer? You just infer, or the common one, you read between the lines, or what does that mean? And
exactly.
Yeah. So really being able to be explicit, that's the key word here.
Yeah.
And for us to teach explicitly means for us to deeply know what we are doing and to be able to explain what we are doing as the thinking that we are doing as we are reading.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. Once you start thinking this way, when you're reading, you'll start to notice more about where you are inferring and on what a range of things, range of ways that you're inferring, very, very different in different parts of texts. And I just love it. It's sort of like that metacognition is really, it's exciting, to discover, oh, I'm doing that. And kids are the same. And I don't want that to become something that takes over their reading time. I came across a teacher recently who has the kids write so much during reading time that they're not really getting enough time to read. So reading time is reading time.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean you can't notice something and perhaps just quickly stick a bookmark. One teacher told me they had too many Post-its in their books. All right, just one. All right, one or two is the maximum.
Yes.
And then you can share it after.
Yeah.
But don't stop reading.
No.
All right.
No.
Don't go and write that in your journal.
No.
Right? Because that's a waste of time.
Yeah. And actually that's a really good point, because that's not what we're modelling. We're not modelling that we write all of this down.
No.
As we are, because it's about using it to effect, not using it to demonstrate to somebody that I've done it.
That's
right. The demonstration of us using it means the understanding that we're gaining from text.
Exactly.
So
in fact, we have to be very careful about modelling, because you made me realise that sometimes we will write things on a chart, like what will we predict, and it all gets written down, and then we go back and compare our predictions. And I always think, why is that being written down? That's such a waste of time. That's not what a reader does.
No.
All right? So don't model that, because you don't want the kids to write it down. You just want them to be thinking about what are they predicting, and keep that in their heads. Now, as we go on, and the kids will say, oh, we thought such and such, but now look at that. It doesn't need to be written down. We don't need to refer back to something written. It takes up time.
Yes.
In the meantime, the kid who's not very good at paying attention is off with the fairies.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So
and still
just
isn't
moving.
Yes, and still isn't reading.
Exactly. It's
Yes.
taking time away
Yes.
from the reading.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I have just 1 minute?
Yes, you
made me
do.
Think about something else then. For example, I have one child who I'm helping who's in grade 3, and he's been identified as one of the kids who, because of COVID, is behind where he should be because of the lockdowns. And so he's being taken out of class to work with somebody else. Now, we can have a whole session on the worthiness or not of that. And guess what? He's having trouble comprehending. So what happens when you go off with that teacher? Well, we get something to read and some questions to answer.
Yeah.
Where's the teaching in that?
Yeah.
There is none. That is not teaching comprehension. That's actually some kind of assessment, I guess. It's not even a very good assessment because we're still not finding out what strategies he's using or not.
That's right.
Or is it the vocabulary, or is it the content, or is it really quite difficult to read, and therefore the reading isn't fluent? Because fluency affects comprehension too. If you read something like a robot without expression and phrasing, A, you're probably not understanding it very well because that's how you're reading, and B, it will actually affect what you understand. It's a very reciprocal thing. So it's why we want kids to reread. And, sometimes kids say, oh, why are we reading this again? Because now we know enough about it. We need to work on our expression and our phrasing to go back and think about what's the author telling us through the punctuation or bold letters or whatever, because that will help us to understand better what we're reading. The more we understand it, the more we enjoy it. And that's the ultimate goal, that we will enjoy what we're reading.
Yes, yeah. Now, I've just got one little thing I keep forgetting, but it has come up a few times where I was going to mention it, that idea of not always necessarily having to find a particular text to work with.
Oh, yes.
The rereading of things, especially big books, and, to be going back to things we already know so that we can go deeper into our thinking about things, but also for our older students, that when we've got class read-alouds on the go, when we've got wonderful chapter books that we're reading over time, we also need to be using those to really model how we do the thinking across chapter books and over longer texts, because some of our readers aren't getting that as something that they're being modelled. It's always, we're just doing it with a little piece of text here and a little piece of text there, and we're not really learning how do we, build our understanding across whole chapters of stories.
And you're right. It affects, the whole book, not just a little bit of it. How we're gathering information on the way that might change our understandings, add to them, etc. And it all needs to go together and make sense. What we need to be careful of is that, well, two things. One, don't just keep introducing new texts all the time, because you do want to get that in depth across something longer, that capacity building.
Yes.
And then there will be times when you purposely want to do it with a short text.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And in fact, I often think younger children write short stories. They actually don't write novels.
No.
And we should, when we want them to know a lot more about writing, we should read short stories to them.
Yes.
But it's not one or the other.
No.
It's both.
Yeah.
And it might be even at different times, but my plan for the year is where I make sure that I do all of the kinds of things I need to do. But also, sometimes I will read to the kids and I'll say, this is such a beautiful piece of writing. We're not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to read it to you and you're going to enjoy it.
Yes.
All right?
Yeah.
So that we don't want everything we read to be used for teaching.
No.
So here's that balance too. During the day, there's going to be something that I will just read, whether it's a part of a story, whether it's a poem. It might be something from a newspaper. We're just going to read it.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yeah.
But then I'm also going to have times when I purposely choose something that I know will be really good for my teaching.
Yes.
And that's another little piece of the puzzle. If I've got this group of kids and I've just been teaching you how to visualize better, I would then like you to be reading material that will help you visualize easily so that you can really work at that. So I will say to my class, these kids are trying to get better at visualizing. Have any of you read something that you thought was really good for visualizing, that it made you visualize very easily? Or could you be on the watch out for anything like that? And we'll put them in this box here and we'll label it good for visualizing, so that if somebody is trying to work at that strategy, they'll know that they can come to these resources. See, this is another kind of just right book.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I should be, if I pick up any book I'm reading, there will be all the strategies I'll be able to demonstrate. I don't have to worry about that. But if I want the kids to practice something, then I'm probably better if they actually have the right sort of text to practice with. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And,
I really like that it's...
It's even things like, if I'm reading non-fiction and the text says, rabbits eat lots of things. And then in the diagram, it's got a carrot and that's labelled, a lettuce and that's labelled, celery and that's labelled. Yeah. Then I'm inferring that rabbits eat
all of those.
Rabbit, carrots, lettuce and celery.
Yeah.
The author didn't say that. But why else would those three things be illustrated and labelled? That's how inferring can happen sometimes in non-fiction. Now, if I've noticed some kids reading non-fiction and they don't look at the diagrams and labels at all. They just read the main body of the text. So they're not actually getting all of the information and understanding. Yeah. And I might need to demonstrate that to them. I'll demonstrate to the class, but now I've got a group that I want to demonstrate that with. But now I want to give them a few more non-fiction books just like that, so they can actually work at doing that to improve their reading. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. And I really like that idea of involving the class in that too, the other readers, saying where have we found this in, where we can use that in another book, so that that's them drawing on their experiences and knowledge of, that strategy or those things that we're doing, and bringing that to the community, bringing that to so if a box of books is made with that as a strategy, or examples of those things, that's really empowering. That's going to get everybody taking notice about those things and
helping each other.
Yes.
Knowing a lot about each other's reading, not just what topics you like to read about, but what you're working at and how I could help you to do that.
Yeah.
I haven't even mentioned the importance of vocabulary and how that influences comprehension.
Yeah, well...
But it's essential, isn't it?
It is absolutely essential. And it doesn't make it onto the list of comprehension strategies.
Well, it's not a strategy.
No.
It's what influences the understanding of what you're reading. It's interesting. Do you know Mem Fox's A Particular Cow?
Oh, yes.
Isn't that fabulous?
Yes, yeah.
And she uses particular, I think nearly on every page, and by the end of it, kids will really know what particular means.
Yes.
It's written for beginning readers, preschool kids even.
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought, Pamela Allen uses the same word who sank the boat.
Yes.
And so, for no particular reason, he decided to go for a row in the bay. And kids pick up on those words because they're so interesting, I think. But I love the way Mem has actually taught the kids the meaning of particular, because it gets used in so many ways.
Yes.
And, I tried to work out, how would I explain the meaning of particular to a 5-year-old? It's hard. But through all of those examples, they would get to we would be able to have a good discussion about what it means. And I just use that as an example that right from the beginning, the richer the vocabulary in what the children read, the more chance they have of their vocabulary increasing and developing. And is that essential to be understanding what you're reading?
Yes.
My goodness.
Yes.
So important.
And to use it in our own speaking and in our writing.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I'm going to try and use that word during the day after I've read that book to the kids, and I'm going to encourage them to, aren't I?
Yes.
Right.
And they become critical words, don't they, in our lives, because they have we've had a particular experience with those words. So
exactly.
Or particular experiences. Mem Fox's this and that.
Yep.
There's another one, just that, like those phrases.
Exactly.
It's not just vocabulary, isn't just about singular words, but the phrases, the idioms, all of these aspects of language. It is all exciting. It is all so interesting, and that's what all of this is about for our students. Is the richness and the joy that comes from engaging with texts in such meaningful and powerful ways.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And, they want to read that book many times because it's such an interesting book to read. And I tell you what, you don't know what it's about unless you're looking at the pictures. Yeah. So, and there's so many nuances in it. There's so much to infer in it. You could read it 1,000,000 times and find more in it. Yeah. But, it also gives us a very special message for, and I think particularly when kids are in about year 3 and 4, and perhaps a little earlier, they love to find series that by one author that they love to read. And yes, that's really important. And especially if kids find an author they like, to get hooked into those books is fantastic. But the teacher also needs to be aware that might be very limiting in the vocabulary development. Yeah. So it's our job to also find them other books they'll like, and particularly by authors who have rich vocabulary in whatever they write. Authors like Kate DiCamillo.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
One of my favourites.
Exactly.
I can't get enough of.
It's true.
Yes.
But, if you go back to your favourites, they all write rich stuff.
Yes.
So it's all of these things work together, don't they?
And I think in just what you're saying there is, I'm just going to bring this, no matter what time people are listening to this podcast, but it is new at the moment. But the English curriculum, so ACARA's the Australian curriculum, the new version, has just landed a couple of weeks ago before this podcast. And I just want to point out to people, I'm hoping people will really go in for a good read of it, because there are some really strong reminders for us of the things that we've been talking about today, about the importance of this variety of texts that students are engaging with, and they're quite in the level description for each year level. The range of texts that students are reading and the features of those texts are to be rich and are to be enjoyable and are to be solid for those students. So there's that wonderful connection about the types of texts, including they talk about that there's features of text that can be used by students as models for creating their own
Exactly.
work.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's that wonderful connection, and of course the whole language, literature, literacy connection, the three strands across the Australian curriculum. We've been hanging around each of those strands today. The importance of literature, that in language, that text structure and organisation, that's a really critical part there. And that language that's in those texts that we can use for expressing ideas, and that the comprehension. And I'm really enjoying that in the analysing, interpreting and evaluating section of the Australian curriculum, that one of the first things is thinking about audience and purpose of texts. And that then there we've got those processes, but we're not just being these things just happening to us. Everything is about being very active. And I love that the section on comprehension starts with use comprehension strategies. And I think that's the big piece for us to connect to today, is that's why teachers, I think, keep asking that question, is we haven't always had the resources around us to think about how do we help our students to use and to be using those. And you've talked today, Di, about all of those key elements. We need to see explicit demonstrations of those, to try those with the teacher through that demonstration with text, and to then use it as we read.
Yep.
So I think we might call that a wrap for today, unless I'm sure there's still something. I'm sure there's still other things that we could add on here.
There are.
But so many things.
Yeah.
But for we hope that gives, and maybe we do a follow-up.
Sure.
One on comprehension, but I think that's answers some big questions around how can we teach it effectively, and that big shift from not having students just answering, like what is it to be a comprehender? It's about using those strategies and knowing how we can use them for anything that we're reading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, we haven't even talked about critical literacy.
No.
We need to be able to read for bias, etc. So
yes,
there's lots to do.
Lots more, but I think it's been good. And I love that you've been able to talk with us about, have that list of what those comprehension strategies are. So, and I think that's just so helpful for people to feel like, okay, we know where we can go. What is it that we're trying to help our readers to use in their own reading? And by knowing that list, I think that can help us as teachers learn more about those, to be more explicit in what we're teaching.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Di.
Thank you,
as
Sharon.
always, for that wonderful for the think aloud that you do, that you let us into, really clearly let us into your thinking, and how we can, as teachers, use that to great effect and for high impact for our own learners. So really appreciate all of your insights and wisdom into all things comprehension.
Okay, it's always wonderful to talk with you because you're so knowledgeable. So thank you, Sharon.
Oh, thank you, Di. And we will have plenty of things for people to follow up with in the show notes.
Okay.
And I think there's some of the books you've mentioned too. We'll pop those up because people always love to know. Just to have books brought to them, titles of books that we can go. Now, what was the name of the book that you read about Holly?
That was The Land of Never Endings.
The Land
of Never Endings. And it's by Kate Saunders. And, it's just got so many great accolades.
Yes, well, I feel like I don't know that I've come across Kate Saunders.
No. Well, fortunately, I go to a great children's bookshop, And I know you've got a couple over there too. And if I spend time just browsing there, I come across new books all the time. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Well, I'm, of course, Kate Saunders has got me so in to that book already.
You want to read it?
I want to read it. It needs to be in my
sure.
collection too.
Yeah.
All right. So
Okay.
thank you, Di, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. We've loved to see that so many of you have subscribed to our episodes from all corners of the world. The Teachers Toolkit podcast is all about giving you an insider's guide to top teaching ideas, tools, techniques in literacy teaching and learning. So please subscribe to our weekly newsletter via the website and you'll receive advance notice on blogs, podcasts, events and ways to contact us. And thank you, Di. All the best to you and to all of our listeners. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.